Villains. We love to hate them. They're despicable, they're deplorable, and so fun to portray at the gaming table. But so often, villains can end up being flat and boring, just a tougher version of the mooks that your players mow down. And that's a damn shame, because a good villain should be more than a bad guy with a larger pool of hit points. So I'm going to show you how to create a great D&D villain, one that's going to shake your players to their core and stick in their memory for years to come. But before we do that, be sure to click on the subscribe button down below so that you don't miss any of our future content. When creating a villain, you need to start somewhere. That starting point is the big idea behind the villain. It's the one sentence that paints a broad picture of who they are. You can come up with a big idea for your villain by looking at the heroes of your game. In almost all cases, the villain should be a dark reflection of the heroes and their values. If you have a devout paladin, your big idea could be an ex-member of the Order and an oathbreaker with a massive chip on his shoulder. If your heroes are the steal from the rich and give to the poor type, then it could be a rich tax-evading noble who will stop at nothing to keep others down so that he can stay on top. If your party is rebelling against some imperial menace, then it's probably a bloodthirsty general who has sworn to stamp out the rebellion. Having this sort of dark reflection of the heroes creates a narrative symmetry. You get two forces on opposite sides of the narrative working against each other to tip the scales in their favor. That narrative symmetry can provide a really satisfying experience for everybody at the table. If you're building a new world that nobody's played in yet, then you can't create a villain that's a dark reflection of the heroes. You've got to start from scratch by looking at the world itself. You already know things about your world that you can use. You know its genre, high fantasy, low fantasy, science fiction. You know events that have happened, wars, famines, plagues. You know its legends and its mythologies. You even know what sorts of adventures you want to see play out. With all that, you can start crafting a big idea for your villain. Is it a high fantasy world? The big idea could be a necromancer waging war with legions of the undead. Want to run a heist adventure? Then it could be a crime boss with a lot of gold stashed beneath his illicit casino. Is your world a little tiny demiplane? Then it's the jealous ruler of the land who refuses to let anybody leave. Defining the world helps narrow down not only who the villain is, but who they can be. A science fiction villain with lots of spaceships isn't going to fit into a dark fantasy setting. It just wouldn't make sense. Now, once you have that big idea, you can start defining the villain's personality. Who are they? What are the hallmarks of their character that make them stand out in the sea of faceless goons that your party is going to murder? There's no one-size-fits-all checklist for a villain personality. Some are loud and boisterous, like the Joker. Some are serious and domineering, like Darth Vader. Others are cold and calculating, like Hannibal Lecter. Close your eyes and think about your villain for a moment. Repeat the big idea in your head a couple of times. What are some adjectives that come to mind about your villain? Your big idea might even contain a few. For example, I'm going to develop that rich, tax-evading noble who will stop at nothing to keep others down so that he can stay on top. Some words that come to mind are greedy and ruthless and cunning. Once you've got your words, go ahead and write them in a comment down below and let me know how you plan to develop those into personality traits for your villain. For my villain, the personality trait sentences are gonna be, he greedily takes money from those on his land through made-up taxes, fines, and shakedowns. He ruthlessly kills off any competition through hired assassins. He cunningly manipulates the crown so that he can eventually organize a coup and become king. You can keep going for as long as you want to get a good idea of who your villain is, but I recommend at least a minimum of 3 words and 3 sentences. When you're finished, you've got what I call a personality outline. With that personality outline in hand, you can start thinking about what brought the villain to this place. Where did they come from? What is their background? Just like a good player character, a good villain doesn't exist in a vacuum. They didn't just pop up out of nowhere. Something made them. Something forged them. For each item in your personality outline, ask yourself, why would this be? How would they come to be this way? Using my own villain's personality outline, well, he's greedy because he associates money with self-worth. He was taught that anybody without money is worthless, and so he wants as much of it as possible. He's ruthless and kills off competition because he's never valued life. He's a psychopath and his only real concern is getting caught doing bad things. That would ruin his reputation after all, and so he hires assassins. Lastly, he wants to usurp the throne because he's the king's bastard and he feels that he's due his birthright. This could also be another reason why he's greedy. He needs money to fund his endeavor. So from just asking questions about those 3 personality traits, I get a pretty good idea of who this villain was as a child and how he grew up. Likewise, you'll get a much better view of your own villain once you do the same. If you can't tell, I love helping people tell good stories and helping them be more creative. It's what Lunch Break Heroes is all about. And it's why I created the Deck of Many Quests and its expansion, Gothic Horrors. These 2 decks are like Cards Against Humanity meets Dungeons & Dragons. You draw a quest card and you read its prompt. Then you fill in the blanks for creatures and items with other cards from the deck to get one of hundreds of thousands of unique quest combinations. You mix in a little of your own imagination and you've got something entirely unique. You might use the combination you draw, or you might not, but I guarantee it'll get you thinking. The Deck of Many Quests is already in the hands of thousands of dungeon masters and storytellers around the world, and it can be in your hands too. Head on over to lunchbreakheroes.com to snag your copy today. Now with that little bit of self-promotion out of the way, let's get back to making a villain. With the villain's background in mind, it's time to think about their motivation for doing the horrible things that your heroes are going to take great exception to. Villains don't do horrible things for no reason. They don't think the horrible things that they're doing are horrible at all, or if they do, they're horrible for a very good reason. Always remember, the villain is the hero of their own story, and that they wholeheartedly believe that they're right. So when you think about why they're doing what they do, we need to jump into their shoes and take on the I'm the main character mindset. Come up with a few bad deeds and use your creativity to bridge the gap between their background, their personality, and those actions. Then explain yourself as the villain. I did blank because blank. Fill in those blanks and you've got a villainous motivation. A lot of your villain's motivation is gonna come from their backstory. After all, it's the backstory that tells us how they became a villain. They felt spurned by the Jedi Order. They're a sadist and they enjoy causing pain. They got kicked out of the Academy Fine Arts Vienna. You can use whatever pissed them off in their past as fuel for the fires of their nefariousness. Now that you have a big idea, personality traits, a background, and a motivation, congratulations, you have a villain. But you're not done yet. We need to make sure that the villain is going to be a fun and memorable challenge for the heroes. Think about how you want the villain to oppose your heroes. Are they going to smack the barbarian in the face with a huge sword, or are they going to stand behind an army of hired thugs? Your villain doesn't need to be able to go toe-to-toe with your heroes. Some villains are weak and fight the heroes with their mind and minions. Others are using magic and the traps in their lair. Once you know how you want the villain to oppose your heroes, come up with stats to reflect that. If they're swinging a big sword, they have high strength. Hired thugs, then high charisma, lots of magic, high intelligence or wisdom. You know the deal. If they're in a lair, then create a lair that matches up to the villain's personality and populate it with lots of traps. A good lair strips away the party's resources and saps their strength so that when they face the villains, they're on equal footing. Make the lair just as much a part of the encounter as the villain themselves. No matter what, I recommend that you watch Matt Colville's video on action-oriented monsters because it's an absolute revelation when creating boss monsters or villains. There's a link to that video down in the description below. The basic gist of action-oriented monsters is that you give your villain extra things that they can do each round. Every round, it's something different and thematic, like calling in reinforcements, resurrecting an ally, or collapsing the ceiling and damaging everybody. The sky's the limit with this sort of thing, but it's gotta be on par with who your villain is. You're not gonna see a lone assassin calling in reinforcements, and the little prat that stands behind his thugs isn't gonna whip out some badass Super Saiyan attack that damages everybody in a 100-mile radius. Now with your villain planned out and their personality, their background, their motivation, and how they're gonna fight the heroes, you're all set. But maybe you got to the end of this video and you're still stuck for ideas. Maybe you're sitting there with a blank piece of paper in front of you, pencil in hand, and not a darn thing is coming to mind. That's okay. I have one more suggestion for you. If you're stuck on coming up with a villain for your game, go ahead and take a look through the world's history for inspiration. Peruse Wikipedia or history books or old folklore. There are plenty of people throughout history that did terrible things, probably worse things than you can come up with on your own. At least I hope so. Imagine a grave-robbing necromancer who decorates like Ed Gein. There's a creepy horror villain for you. How about a sadistic ruler in the fashion of Phalaris and his brazen bull? That's perfect for the plucky rebellion to rise up against. What about a suave nobleman engaged in slave trade modeled after Jeffrey Epstein? Definitely the kind of guy that's gonna hide behind an army of hired muscle and well-connected friends. Horrible people have been around forever, and we're gonna have plenty more as long as humanity's around. And with a little work and some stat block wizardry, you can fit those terrible people right into your game.